It's really a pleasure to welcome to the program today Douglas Rushkoff, who's a media theorist, professor at CUNY Queens College, and also host of the Team Human podcast, as well as author of the new book, Team Human, from W. W. Norton. Really great to have you on, Douglas. Big admirer of your work.
Oh, thanks. It's good to be with you.
So maybe to start with, to get our audience into sort of your framing and sort of point of view on a lot of this stuff, you've said that technology and markets often are crafted or end up inherently having an anti-human agenda, which is interesting sort of language to use. What is that agenda and how does it develop?
Well, really, that agenda developed, as far as I can tell, really in the late Middle Ages with the invention of the chartered monopoly, which is kind of the proto-corporation, and central currency. That both of those were invented really to prevent the rise of the middle class and to preserve the monopolies feet. We had the beginnings of what looked very much like internet culture in the late Middle Ages when people came back from the Crusades and they opened up these trade routes. They had little local markets with local currencies that were optimized for transaction. They were getting wealthy. And that was a problem for the aristocracy that hadn't worked in 10 centuries. So they came up with a monopoly currency, which was basically like almost like some kind of a Windows operating system that you use it or you can't transact at all. And it was this growth-based, interest-based currency that if you borrowed some in order to transact, you had to pay back more, in order for the economy to keep going. And instead of being able to have your own business, you had to work for one of the king's chartered monopolies as an employee, selling your time rather than the value you created. So both of these innovations, as I see them, were really anti-human in that they disconnected workers from the value they were creating. We got brands to disconnect consumers from the producers from whom they were buying stuff. And we got mass marketing and mass media to really disconnect consumers from one another so that we bought things instead of relating to other people. Now, you come to the 21st century in the digital age, we had the possibility, and this is what got so many of us excited in those early internet days, the possibility to really retrieve all of those cool peer-to-peer bottom-up values of medievalism and the commons and the co-op. All of these things were starting to emerge. But then, along comes Wired magazine and these ideas about how the internet's going to save the NASDAQ stock exchange and allow us to have this exponential growth like we've never had before. And now we have a whole lot of digital companies that are not creating tools or platforms to help people live their lives. They're creating tools and platforms that really just help corporations extract value from people, either in terms of their time or their data or even their consciousness, their choice making. So when I say that the digital landscape has become anti-human, really what I mean is that it's extending and amplifying kind of the most anti-human or dehumanizing biases of corporate growth-based capitalism and putting them on digital steroids. And it's really hard for people to really maintain any sense of coherence or values in such a space.
Yeah, so I mean, there's actual technological utopianism, right? Like really, truly, the we will be happier and more free and self-actualized the more science and technology develop. But then there's more of what I would call like kind of a passive admiration or maybe an unquestioning adoption of some of these technologies that's not as like hard and fast about we need to push technology and science as much as possible because it's inherently good, but just sort of like, I'm sure that as all of this stuff develops, it's good to use in a sort of uncritical way. And that's where I see a lot of the less healthy sort of like adoption of technology and social media use coming from. This kind of the default position is I'll use it unless I can very clearly think of why not to, rather than what Cal Newport, for example, advocates, which is let's evaluate each of these tools and technologies one by one to see what it actually does for us.
Right. I come from the early cyberculture, which was informed by really kind of the psychedelic West Coast counterculture. And I remember the first time Timothy Leary, the big LSD guru, first time he used the internet, he said, "Oh my gosh, this is acid." That it's as powerful as an LSD trip, and the way it changes the way someone thinks about the world and the way everything's connected and the access to information and people that it gives you. But if the internet is as powerful as a psychedelic, then it's really important what mindset and what setting you do that drug in. If you have the set and setting of I want to do something that's going to help people connect in meaningful ways and help the planet and other species and everybody live more healthily and make a more egalitarian economy and increase social justice, you're going to get very different effects than if you're really just a 19-year-old kid who invents something on the net and then listens to whatever the venture capitalist tells him to do. So we end up, with technologies that are as powerful as drugs, but we don't recognize that they're that powerful. When you're on the internet, you are on the internet or on Facebook or on Twitter, the same way that you could be on marijuana or on LSD or on cocaine. And if you really want to know, what a drug is like, it's funny, Timothy Leary said this too. Before you take any drug, look into the eyes of someone who's on that drug. Decide if that's somewhere that you want to be. But none of us are thinking about the way that we bring these devices and platforms and apps into our worlds, almost soon to be into our bodies. I feel like people worry more about how a program is going to affect the operating system of their computer when they install it than how it's going to affect the operating system of their lives when they start using it.
What sort of advice or guidelines or infrastructure do you suggest people at the individual level sort of employ for having a sort of healthy diet of technology in their lives?
Well, I don't know that they need any technology in their diet. You know what I mean? On a certain level, it's what's a healthy diet of work? What's a healthy diet of media? What's a healthy diet of online interaction? But almost anything that you do through digital technology is a substitute for something that you could be doing in real life. And I think that what many of us are learning is that we're trying to live our lives at scale, at the same scale as a corporation or a Kardashian or something. It's not a person, a Kardashian. Maybe there's a person in there somewhere, but it's a lifestyle. That's a mediated existence. And we end up getting engaged with people in real life. We end up losing the ability to make eye contact and establish rapport and breathe with other people. So I don't really think that there's any, particularly healthy or unhealthy amount or quota or quotient of technology, as long as you have the sort of the real life experience and sustenance for you to be able to engage in those online experiences in a healthy way. For the most part, the people who are making the platforms that we engage with each other online, they don't have our best interests at heart. Right? We all know now. They go to classes at Stanford in captology, which is, how to hypnotize people using digital technology. That we take the addiction algorithms from Las Vegas slot machines, and they're in our social media feeds to get us to keep checking them. So, in some sense, I feel like almost any use of digital technology is a compromise. And you have to be aware that, okay, I'm now going to compromise the integrity of this interaction, like the one I'm having with you. We're going to compromise that interaction in order to reach more people. But if we're very aware of the ways in which it's compromised, that I'm not making real eye contact with you, that we can't establish rapport with one another, then we're going to have to be extra compassionate and extra conscious that that none of the painstakingly evolved social mechanisms that we have for establishing rapport with one another are able to activate when we're using this medium.
Yeah, in other words, you and I would arguably have a better conversation in person, but for the purposes of filming this segment for my program and we're in different locations, we've sort of made the compromise that we're going to do it over Skype, over this video conferencing technology. That's a compromise that we're making for what I guess we've both calculated, if we've thought about it this deeply, is a sort of greater good, which is we're going to get this interview out to people.
Right. And as power users, I realize what a power user is not someone who understands necessarily how to reprogram Skype, or how to know how is our image happening. A power user is someone who understands those kind of dehumanizing compromises and knows how to compensate for it, can accept it, and that's, and I'm sure for you, when you pick guests or when I pick podcasts to be on, I try to get a sense of, is this someone who understands that, or is this someone who's I'm going to go down some pretty dark places with, because they don't they're not going to be forgiving enough of this medium and how it works.
So along those lines, I mean, not to be overly dystopian, but also not to sugarcoat it, what do you see as the extrapolated out 5 years, 10 years, whatever, what do you see as the real practical dangers to our world becoming more technology centric?
I mean, the main problem with any of these technologies is that, the kid who invents the tech invents it for one reason, but then once they take the money from the venture capitalist, I mean, and these are kids, these are college freshmen who drop out of school, with their new app or platform, and then they listen to these venture capitalists, then they have two objectives. One is to do the app or whatever it was that they thought they were going to make. And now the second one is to figure out a way for that app to also make many billions of dollars. That's really hard. Twitter was considered a failure when it was making $2 billion a year, which I think that's about as much money as you could expect from a 140 character messaging app. But you're not allowed to stop at 2 billion. You have to keep growing your company. So now Twitter has to pivot from a messaging company into an advertising company, into a streaming media company, into something else, getting more and more, becoming more and more extractive all along the way. So when I look at that trajectory, what I see are a whole lot of CEOs and billionaires looking to figure out, how can I earn enough money to insulate myself from the world that I'm creating by building these kinds of platforms? When I met with these billionaires kind of by mistake, I thought I was doing a talk, and the main advice they wanted from me was strategies on their fallout shelters, their doomsday bunkers for the event.
I've read about that actually. There's a couple I highly recommend the audience Google that and read about it because it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I write about it's in Team Human also. I mean, sort of the answer to that. But when I look at that, I get concerned that we're going to be in a world with increasing economic inequality and social unrest and climate change, because right now. And I mean, luckily, it's a progressive audience I'm speaking to here. But even Adam Smith talked about there being three main factors of production: land, labor, and capital. Right? The land that we use, the place where we're running our company, the labor, the people that are working to make this happen, like all those little Uber drivers, and then the capital. And all three have sort of an equal place in production. But right now, in the digital realm, capital is the only one that has a voice. Capital is the only one that scales infinitely. You and me, people and land don't scale infinitely. And when capital is the only one that has a voice, well, your labor gets disenfranchised and your land gets destroyed. So we're dealing with climate change and we're dealing with economic inequality. So unless we were really to shift, I see those things gets, not necessarily permanently worse, but worse to a point that people say, oh, wait a minute. This is not a problem of digital technology. This is a problem of economics. This is a problem of growth-based corporate capitalism that just happens to be amplified and accelerated by digital technology. So, the beauty of it, my optimistic take is that digital tech, by kind of putting capitalism on steroids, it created something that's almost like the movie Koyaanisqatsi, where everything happens in fast time. And because it's happening so quickly this time, we can sort of see it. I feel like most people are more aware of the extractive nature of the operating system, of this economic operating system, and looking for alternatives. So I think we're going to start to see the emergence of cooperatives, worker-owned businesses. We're going to see people treating resources like commons, the same way we did, back in the Middle Ages when we understood this is a precious resource, and rather than creating a market for it, we're going to guard it as a commons and enforce its use and share it. So I'm actually optimistic that things are happening clearly enough and quickly enough that people are going to react from a much more human-centered, sustainable outlook.
I hope you're right, and I do agree that the speed with which it's happening does seem to paint a clearer picture of the fact that that it is indeed happening. Make sure to check out the book Team Human. We've been speaking with the book's author, Douglas Rushkoff. Douglas, really a pleasure having you on today.
Oh, it's good to be on with you. Thanks for what you do.